So this tutorial is about composed upon Westminster Bridge, September 3rd, 1802. So first of all, let's have a little think about the context of this poem. We know that Wordsworth is one of the Romantic poets. He's one of the forefathers of Romanticism, so one of the kind of first Romantics, along with Coleridge. He had a childhood where he grew up in a very rural environment, and that became a really important part of his identity. So he's got that very kind of romantic predisposition where he experiences the sublime through nature, and nature is an important feature in a lot of his poems. Now what's unusual about this poem is that he's experiencing that kind of spiritual, transcendental experience that he would normally have within nature, but he experiences that when he looks at the beauty of London. But remember, he's looking at the beauty of London at dawn, first thing in the morning, before everybody else is awake. So there's none of the kind of pollution and things like that from the factories yet. We also know the Romantic poets put feelings ahead of kind of reason and logic, and that they thought the imagination was really important, and that's why they very much kind of hold up the child as the model of how a human being should be. And that definitely comes through in the poem. If we look at things like dull would he be of soul who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty, just here. You know, what he's saying is you're really boring, you're dead inside if you don't experience kind of joy and you're not inspired by the beauty of the city as it's laid out before me at this moment in time. The other bit of information that's really important contextually for this poem is that the title is very much misleading. Okay, so it's quite unusual to have a poem which has got like a date and a time in the title. And it's a little bit disingenuous because we know from his sister's diary that this moment in time actually happened in July, and that he writes the poem in September. But the way that it's phrased, composed upon Westminster Bridge, it's as if he had this like moment of inspiration and he decided to write the poem right there and then. And obviously that kind of image of him being inspired by things, having these strong feelings, this like moment of imagination, fits with the idea that he wants to create of what a Romantic poet is. So that's also really important context. Now the form of this poem is that it's a Petrarchan sonnet. Okay, so you've got two different types of sonnet, Shakespearean sonnets and Petrarchan sonnets, and this is a Petrarchan one. It's just kind of, they have slightly different rhyme schemes basically. Sonnets should be written in iambic pentameter, so have 10 beats per line. I'm not going to tell you too much about how it doesn't always regularly fit like that, but actually the whole point of iambic pentameter is that the emphasis is on the second beat, so it goes D, and actually there aren't many lines within this poem which have pure iambic pentameter. Lots of them have trochee, so the emphasis is on the first beat, dum D, or a spondee here, dum dum, dear God. So there's emphasis on both of those words. So I'm just going to tell you about a few examples of that as we go through that are interesting to think about in terms of the form. Last thing to say about the title is it's interesting that it's composed upon a bridge, okay, which is like a sort of symbol of a bond between the natural and the man-made world. So he kind of, you know, human beings here are kind of overcoming and controlling nature, but they're also, I suppose, able to immerse themselves in it via the bridge, because you can walk over the bridge and stand above the river. Now, seeing this is using kind of very romantic tendencies to talk about the built environment, it kind of fits, doesn't it, that it takes place on that bridge which connects those two different environments together. It suggests as well, the title, by suggesting that it's composed upon Westminster Bridge and the sort of specific time and date, suggests that the perspective is limited. So this is like, it's almost like a postcard. It's a single spot at a single moment in time. However, the view from Westminster Bridge is panoramic, okay, and the whole kind of poem itself, it isn't just about his solitary experiences standing in the bridge. It's out from there to kind of allude to this kind of shared experience, this kind of community. Okay, then let's look at the opening of the poem. Earth has not anything to show more fair. Look at how the word order here is a bit unusual. Normally we'd say there is nothing more fair to show than earth. Okay, so it's quite like awkward, it doesn't feel natural, the way the words are put in that order. And what we call that is hyperbaton, okay? And that's really there to foreground the earth, but also to give it this feeling of being profound, okay? So right from the first sentence, the hyperbaton is making it feel like this is a grand declarative. He's like romanticizing the city from the outset. It's also hyperbolic, isn't it? The idea that there can't be anything more beautiful on the earth than this particular moment in time. So the tone of the poem is definitely set up from that grand declarative right at the beginning. Also interesting that we have a trochee here, okay, and what the trochee does, it emphasizes the noun earth, okay, and it also surprises the reader, okay, by starting with a powerful beat, the dum, instead of d-dum, which you would get with iambic pentameter. It surprises the reader just like he's suggesting that this is really the most beautiful thing. We've talked about the next line, haven't we? Dull would he be of soul who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty. Okay, he's experiencing this feeling of awe being there, just like a romantic poet would. And he suggests you'd have to be pretty dull and boring not to stop at this moment in time and look out over London. There's an interesting juxtaposition here between the verb touching and the noun majesty. So touching kind of suggests intimacy, and majesty suggests something much kind of bigger and broader, and that's suggesting that London can be both of those things, okay? And I've kind of described this as giving a sense of awe. There's a lot of personification in this poem, and that's the literary technique that is used next. This city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning, silent, bare. Ships, towers, domes, theatres and temples lie open unto the fields and to the sky. So we've got this image here of the city personified as a beautiful woman. But what's important to notice is the use of this adverb now, okay? So the whole of the poem focuses on the idea that this is a particularly fleeting moment of beauty, and the reader and the speaker are kind of positioned in the absolute present at this moment in time. There are also lots of pauses, lots of caesura that go on. I've highlighted them all in yellow, okay, throughout the lines, and we've got all these kind of listing sentences here as well. And what that does is it really slows the pace down, okay, and expands up the description. And I think those kind of pauses create a calm feeling and give us a chance to focus on imagining the city and the beauty of it at that moment in time. We also get this imagery of the city as silent and bare, okay, so these adjectives are important because they give us a feeling of kind of peace and calm, but they also reinforce the kind of idealization of London at this moment in time. So we know that it's only peaceful and calm and beautiful because everybody's asleep and still in bed. Now this listing sentence is an interesting one because it actually refers to some of the kind of powerful positions in London at this point in time, and a bit of context that we haven't talked about is the British Empire, okay, so this is 1802. It's like prime British Empire time, when London is an incredibly powerful city, and kind of ships are going to make us think of the Royal Navy. We've got towers and domes, which are potentially like cathedrals and churches, but it's Westminster, so you've also got the House of Parliament nearby, okay, so all of the kind of power and majesty of London is there. And then all of that power and majesty is there, and it's open to nature because it's open unto the fields and to the sky. So it's interesting the way again that he's choosing to connect the man-made environment to the natural environment, and that verb open really gives us a feeling of kind of spaciousness. One thing that I forgot to say actually is the use of the colon here suggests at the beginning that he's going to go on to explain. We've got the octet here, and really what he's doing in the octet is kind of describing the scene and getting us as the reader to imagine what it would be like to be somewhere so beautiful. Okay, where do we get up to here? So we've also got all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. So these adjectives, bright and glittering, give it this kind of dreamlike feel, don't they, that, you know, we might expect because of the particular moment in time that it's in. We've also got a semantic field of light and bright and glittering with really positive connotations that really show this sense of clarity. However, the adjective smokeless is a reminder that those factories are going to start up in the city again, And so there's your kind of link to context, that this beauty is a fleeting, transient thing. That's very kind of like romantic idea as well. You know, Keats, another one of the romantic poets, particularly interested in the way that like all of our experiences, all of the beauty in life is a kind of transient thing. And then this section here is the sestet, and really this becomes very much about his feelings in this landscape. Okay, now the Volta is the first two lines of the sestet, and this is normally where there is like a shift and kind of contains the key feelings. And in the Volta, he chooses to personify the sun, and he says, "Never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendor valley, rock, or hill." Okay, so what he's basically saying there is the sun's never really blessed the landscape more than it has at this moment in time. That adverb "never," which he repeats again, that it's, you know, this is a fleeting thing. It's like he's never seen anything so beautiful before, and he's never going to see anything so beautiful again. It's also interesting that in this Volta he's choosing again to return to that comparison with the natural landscape, and we get this triad, valley, rock, or hill, of things that classically we would expect a romantic poet to be looking to be inspired by, and to be experiencing the sublime with. Okay, but actually what's being blessed here by the sun is London. So it's like the sun's choosing to consciously bless the city with this extra beauty. As well, isn't it? It's unlikely that the sun has never chosen to do that before. And the next bit is hyperbolic too. "Never saw I, never felt a calm so deep." Okay, that seems quite unlikely too. So I think it's fair to say that that's hyperbolic. This bit here is also full of caesura. Again, look at all these kind of commas and pauses. And I think at this point it's kind of functioning slightly differently. He's feeling this almost like spiritual excitement, and it feels a little bit breathless as he tries to describe to us as the reader just how excited he feels at this moment in time when he sees the beauty of London. We also end with an exclamatory sentence here, okay, and this is definitely a feature of the sestet that we get these exclamatives. You've got one here, and one here. So those exclamatives are really showing us his intense surprise at the calmness that he finds at this moment in London. He continues with this personification. Okay, so suggesting that the natural environment in London is somehow free. Okay, and that definitely seems like a kind of idealization of the scene, doesn't it? And then we get this interjection, "Dear God," okay, again with an exclamative. So the caesura here becomes an exclamation, okay, which really shows that intensity of feeling. Now this is a familiar collocation. That means like two words that go together that they use quite commonly, and so that makes it a really kind of common human experience, this sort of expression that he's trying to make of the profound engagement with the world around him. It's also a spondee, okay, and a spondee is where you have two beats that are both emphasized. So "dear God" amplifies the importance of this moment and draws our attention to it, and it emphasizes that kind of intense surprise that he feels at how beautiful this moment is. He goes on to personify the houses and London itself, okay, so the very houses seem asleep and all that mighty heart is lying still. So that personification is really emphasizing how kind of quiet and still and peaceful London is, which is a very dramatic juxtaposition considering that this is a really busy city and a dirty city, particularly at this moment in time, which again is that idea of it kind of being idolized, you know, this idea that the river's somehow in charge of its own destiny. You know, if you think about Blake's poem London also in the collection, it seems pretty unlikely, doesn't it? Now what's interesting is that as a romantic poet, he's having this spiritual connection to the landscape, but he's kind of proclaiming God here. So it's like a little bit of a disconnect, Could be something a little bit kind of subversive going on here. So his experience of the sublime, which normally romantic poets experience through nature, is unlocking freedom for him. And because the romantic poets could experience that sublime, which was effectively a spiritual experience, without the church, it kind of removes the need for the church and authority. So there's something kind of quietly rebellious, potentially, in this. Depends on how you read it, okay? So the last thing I think to say is that the last line of the poem is one of the only pure lines of iambic pentameter without any caesura in it, without any trochees or spondees, and what that does is it recreates the heartbeat that is there. You know, there's this kind of rhythm that goes despite the disruptions throughout the whole poem, this kind of slow heartbeat that we could talk about in terms of the fact that it is written largely in iambic pentameter. But it's interesting that when he references that heartbeat itself, we get this pure iambic pentameter really creating the kind of power of that heartbeat. It is mighty, so again there's that reference to the context of the British Empire and the power of London, which at this moment in time is lying latent in the quiet whilst everyone's asleep.